So for anyone who maybe didn't go through your program or had a similar pathway, to your understanding, what's the typical way you hear people become a television screenwriter in your region?
So I'll have to be honest with you. Television isn't, we have a long history of film, right? We have a long history of film, even television, to be honest. But I think in my country, television has always kind of always been tied to some network or the other.
Okay.
Because
Okay.
yeah, when you think about some of the greatest shows that people talk about, some of the great shows that people saw in the 80s and the 90s, they were commissioned by the NTA, where my father worked. Like I said, it's a government owned. It used to be like in all the 36 states of Nigeria. It's a government owned television station. So in the 80s and the 90s, they produced a lot of TV. And then Multichoice kind of came, I think, in the 2000s and did the exact same thing. And now, when you think about most of the great shows from the 2000s up till now, it's by Multichoice. So I think that television has always kind of, it's almost like tied to, in Nigeria, like networks on some level. Yeah, independent producers also do television shows, but um, I know the network structure, and I can say that some of the best writers in television are still from yeah, from the network. Most of them end up working on those independent shows and by independent producers, but some of the best are still from the network. So I haven't really had an opportunity to work. I think I've only worked on one, and it was for development. The show hasn't actually been commissioned. I was
Mhm.
called in to develop the story, but on some level, writers that work for networks, they always end up in those um, you know, independent producer rooms. So I don't know. I can't honestly say that I know what it would look like if
Sure.
someone were to try to get into that. I only know of the network structure because I was part of that for so long. I can't speak to the independent producers. I think, writing TV is very different. And here, you find a lot of people who don't have the experience of TV working on TV shows. So it's very different. I hope that's okay, like to make a comment on that.
Absolutely.
Um,
No, please continue.
yeah, yeah. So for the net, I can talk about the network and how it works. Um, it's almost like, think of it as boot camp, where over time, as you work on shows, you get more experience and you get to go on to other responsibilities. When I first got on my first show, and don't scream, but back then the network used to commission 260 episode shows.
60.
Yeah,
Well, you know
and
what? I am learning that because Evelyn, she'll be watching like maybe something from Turkey or somewhere, and it'll be 60 episodes, maybe even 100.
260,
And it might maybe just be the first season. Did you say 260 or 160?
260 episodes.
Y'all
And it used
serious
to
about
take a year.
television?
Yeah, like when I came in, that was the style of, the network would commission these shows. It used to be two shows a year, just two shows, right? And each would be 260 episodes. So you were working on these shows for almost a year, you know, like you were writing on, yeah, because it's a lot of episodes. So it's like a team of writers, and we're working on this show for like a year. And what that did was that you had room to learn, to grow. When you work on a 260 episode, that's a lot of work. Like, I
Yes.
remember my first show, I was hired when the show was already like quarter, I think they were like in episode 60, which isn't even quarter, like, when I first got hired. So I got to experience like the remaining 200 episodes. And my next show was also, so I was hired as something called an auxiliary, a junior writer. So basically, I got to be part of story development and to write scripts, but I didn't have like responsibilities, you know. I could be part of the process, but I wasn't staffed
Yeah.
on the show. Yeah.
It sounds
So
like
my next
maybe
show
it sounds like
sounds like
maybe a PA, maybe a writer's PA, somewhat from a Hollywood. Maybe.
yeah, but don't fall into the trap of thinking about it in the American way because lately I tried to do that recently, but I found that it
Okay.
was very different. Like it's a very different system. I don't know how we started that system because it was way before me. I only started working on network shows in like 2019.
I hear
And
you.
this network
Okay.
had been making shows for like 10 years before then. So I don't know where they got their system from. So, but my first show, I was literally like, yeah, the closest thing is like a writer's assistant.
Or
Yeah.
writer's yeah,
So,
maybe writer's assistant. I
but
wanted to make sure
yeah,
I
that's
had
the
it
best
right.
thing. So, yeah.
Okay, but please
And
continue.
then my
Sorry.
next show, and then my next show was also a 260 episode. And I kind of moved up to being like a writer. So I would get scripts to write. I was also part of story development. And I think that that pretty much continued until 2020 when the network changed the format and they stopped making 260 episode shows. They started making, I think, 130 episode shows, 60 episode shows. They kind of broke things down. So instead of having just 2 shows a year, you had all these different shows. You had like maybe 5 or 6. And, and it created like more opportunity for more people to be part of rooms and stuff. So I think by that time I had already gotten a bit of experience, but I didn't get my first staffed role until 2020. And by staffed role, like I wasn't getting a salary. I was just getting paid to like write scripts, come to story development workshops. But I think 2020 was it 2020? No, 2021 was when I got my very first staffed role. I
Nice.
was an assistant story editor.
Where the money reside.
Yeah, I was finally getting paid. Like it was nice for the first time, like to get paid. I had a salary, and I think that show was a 130 episode.
Okay.
And then after that, I moved on. I moved on all the way up to I was head writer for one show. I did end up being head
Wow.
writer for for like a smaller show
Nice.
for a 20 episode. So yeah, also like a bunch of stuff. But yeah, I did end up being head writer. I've worked as a story editor. I've worked as a script editor. Yeah,
Could you
and what
mind?
that does is
Oh, yeah, no, go ahead. You already beat me to it.
yeah, sure.
I was gonna
No,
say,
sure, go
yeah,
ahead.
maybe could you break each of those down for the newbie who's interested?
Okay. When you say break it down, you mean what are the roles? What do you do in each of these roles?
Yeah,
Like I said, our system might be very different from what you're used to, maybe like in other systems, but the
copy you.
system that I so there's the story, the general, everyone, all the writers, some people, not everyone who's writing on the show might be invited to a story workshop. Okay, so not everyone working on a show, for instance, might be invited to a story workshop. You might have like maybe 20 writers on the show, and there's only 10 writers coming to workshop. I know that it was also like because of the budget, we didn't have like an extensive budget, and these workshops would kind of most of the time they would take about 2 to 3 weeks. Would be in a space, would be in a hotel, working on the story for a certain number of episodes. So we would ideate, would develop characters, develop storylines, and then when we left the workshop, because the work obviously isn't done, and please understand that a lot of this was also budget constrained, right? There's a budget, so it's not
Understood.
like inexhaustive, and we don't have as much budget as like maybe the South African Multichoice might have. So we would work on the story, and then when we left the workshop, the story editors would further develop, into episodes. That was what the story editors did. Made sure that the story was flowing, everything was, And then, of course, the head writer's job is both overseeing the entire story and kind of also like administrative work. You're the one
Gotcha.
who production is talking to directly. You're the one who's making sure that you're following your calendar. You're the one who's making sure that production is getting episodes when you say they're getting episodes. Because something else that you learn is the timelines are crazy.
Oh, they
Like
are.
the timelines are crazy. Sometimes it's like a couple of days. Like you have to get script to production because once production starts, they're not going to pause. So your job is literally to make sure that the scripts are coming, and it doesn't matter what's happening. It doesn't matter what's going on in your personal life.
Wait, for real?
Make sure that you get, yeah, like it's the show must go on. Like it's like make sure that you're getting script. You better be dying if production is getting
Okay.
script. Like it's a lot of work. It was a lot of pressure.
Sound like
So that
Hollywood.
was the head writer's job. Yeah. I don't think head writers sleep well. Like, you're constantly on edge because you have to make sure that things are going well. And then the script editor's job was to go through the scripts and make sure that the tone of the show was, the same. Because when you have all these different people writing different scripts for the same show, you have to make sure that everyone is, writing the show in the way that it's supposed to be written, like that the tone hasn't changed. So yeah, it was a very big machinery. Sometimes you had two script editors, sometimes you had two story editors, but when the shows got smaller, of course, the roles got streamlined. So yeah, that's what you did in those roles. And of course, you had the writers, and then you had junior writers. Yeah, that was pretty much it. That was the system at the time. So
Nice.
that's
Are
what the team
there,
is.
I'm sorry, I said the last part again. I'm sorry.
I said, so that's what you did in each of the roles.
Nice. Is there, in fact, is there any other role you'd expand upon in the writer's room? For anyone who's like, oh, okay, so this writer does this and they do that, or did we ultimately cover it? Actually, all the roles.
Yeah, I think those are the major roles. Like if you're not a head writer, you're not a story editor. Well, so we always had two story editors. Sometimes we also had two script editors.
Okay.
So if you're not any of those, let's say five roles, then you're the writer. You're just writing scripts. You're getting breakdowns. You're writing scripts. So those were the five staffed roles. Those were the people who were getting the salaries, and they had, of course, the largest amount of work to do. So yeah, I think that for our system, that was it. Then of course, within the writers, you had like the junior writers. So that was that. So yeah.
Nice. Yeah, it sounds from the little bit that I've seen. I didn't get to work or be close to like a Hollywood writer's room or a westernized writer's room. So most of what I know is from like discussions like this, podcasts like this, or documentaries we're just seeing behind the scenes or what the writers might have gone through.
I'm pretty sure that they had like I suspect that they have a more advanced system because, like I said, their budget is probably can cover a bit more, like writers, assistants, and
Sure.
there's a
Respect.
lot more people in that. And I don't know how they pay the writers. Like, when you're not staffed, like in the system that I'm used to, you are getting paid per script. So if you're not getting scripts, you're not getting paid because you're not writing. So
Okay.
yeah, it's not the production isn't paying you unless you're writing. So yeah, that was the system. But I'm pretty sure it's kind of like how to put this. It's probably someone took a system from maybe America or the UK and kind of collapsed it to like the barest minimum.
Sure.
Yeah, that's what happens with those things. So yeah.
Yeah, because I'm trying to remember for myself. I did get to talk to, shout out to Kyra Talise. She was a writer on Insecure, and I did get to
Mm.
chat with her. And so that's in like a previous episode, for everyone who's watching, for me as well, because I'm trying to remember what's it all, because I know that, writer's PA, writer's assistant, staff writer, story editor. Um, I feel like I'm missing maybe 2 to 3 other roles, at
think they
least
also have
for
like
our system.
storyliners.
I think so.
Storyliner.
I think the
There's a
showrunner.
lot more role. Yeah.
There's
Okay,
yeah.
so here we do have showrunners, but it's kind of different for us. It doesn't mean it doesn't always mean what it means in America here,
How so?
honestly.